The Sega Dreamcast was a dream video game system. Its great library of games casts a long shadow. Eight-bit joystick. The Dreamcast was Sega's final attempt at having their own video game platform, and they made an incredible system that many gamers loved. But the Dreamcast became a castaway once the PlayStation 2 hit the market. Then, Sega's plans for video game domination was all but a dream. The Dreamcast was only on the market for a year and a half before Sega threw in the towel and decided to become a third-party developer for their competitors Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation. Sega intended to cast a dream game system, but it was not enough to wake up from their ongoing $400 million in losses financial nightmare. They did a ton of things right with the Dreamcast. It was just not enough to fix their wider financial issues. I was a Dreamcast fan when it was new, and I continued to get the games that I wanted after Sega moved on, and I'm glad that I did. Of all the retro video game systems that I play, the Dreamcast is the most powerful and the closest to modern video game systems. I often dream of its unique library of great Sega games. I consider the Dreamcast to be the first modern video game system with advanced 3D graphics and analog joystick controls with analog triggers. It even had a built-in display on the controller and had 4 controller ports for in-room multiplayer action. It was designed to be online with a built-in modem, and it helped shape every major game system after it. Sega and Capcom released some of their best games ever on the Dreamcast, and I had a hard time getting this list down to 10 picks. It is a dream come true. In this video series, I'm going to feature a different retro game system and highlight the essential games that you need to check out if you're curious about that system. And I'm going to start with the Sega Dreamcast. In future videos, I'll be sharing with you which games I think are absolutely essential and represent the true experiences of each game system can only provide. If you are curious about the systems, these are the games that I would recommend that you start with. I'm also going to focus on games that you can actually get copies of without too much difficulty or having to sell your dental fillings to afford them. I'm going to pass up ports of older games, and it's okay if a game later moved on to another platform as long as its definitive initial experience was on the game system that I'm covering. I have a lot of great videos in the works, and I hope that you would consider subscribing and ring the bell so you don't miss a single video. Now, on to the games. Crazy Taxi by Sega. Crazy Taxi is such an essential part of the Dreamcast experience that I had to put it before Virtua Fighter 3. It is a redonkulous, pure video game experience. For those of you who don't know, Crazy Taxi is a cartoonish arcade racing game where you play an extreme taxi driver who picks up demanding customers and has to drive them to various locations at breakneck speeds completely devoid of any semblance of safety. Luckily, your car is completely invincible and people will jump out of the way if they happen to be too close to your Crazy Taxi Deathmobile. Some of these real-world destinations are licensed businesses such as Tower Records, KFC, and Pizza Hut. These were later changed to generic places when this game was re-released on other systems. The music is phenomenal. It is a time capsule of fun, fast 2000-era punk. I'm glad that I realized that I should turn off all the music in the game before I record the Crazy Taxi footage because the music is quite good, but it is also absolute copyright strike bait. I wish that YouTube would allow me to put the music in this video. It is so good. By the way, One of my favorite drivers is BD Joe, and they changed his dub in all other re-releases of this game, and I don't think he's quite as funny and entertaining as he is in the initial Dreamcast release. Crazy Taxi has been brought to other systems, but the definitive version is on the Dreamcast. This was based on an arcade game. Sega was the master at crafting a simple but compelling arcade experience, and the Dreamcast was their first and only system that could legitimately bring home an arcade game like this with no compromises. My friend Noah is ridiculously good at this game, and Crazy Taxi is a perfect example of the arcade idiom, easy to learn, difficult to master. Crazy Taxi is stupid fun. Glorious, stupid fun. In the words of BD Joe, yeah, we gonna have some fun. Virtua Fighter 3 TB by Sega. When Sega's original Virtua Fighter hit the arcade, it changed everything. It is impossible to understate how influential it was on the entire game industry. It was reported that Virtua Fighter is the game that inspired Ken Kutaragi, father of the PlayStation, to have hardware 3D acceleration and to have 3D be a core feature of the PlayStation. So, when Sega unveiled the Dreamcast and its ability to run an arcade-perfect version of their Model 3-based Virtua Fighter 3, it was impressive testimony on the 3D power of the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was the first game console made by Sega to really have 3D graphics with ease, and nothing showed this off more than Virtua Fighter 3 TB. The animation is more fluid than ever before. Sega really took the graphics to the next level with the inclusion of real interactive 3D environments. Virtua Fighter 3 might not be that impressive from the perspective of modern games, but you have to realize that it was one of the first games to have a modern look and helped shape what modern games look like now. Soul Calibur by Namco. One of the quintessential Dreamcast experiences alongside Crazy Taxi is Soul Calibur. Soul Calibur is hands down one of the best fighting games ever made with a low barrier to entry, and it has a learning curve that focuses on timing rather than memorizing button inputs. It originally started off as an arcade game, and the first in the series was called Soul Blade and was on the Sony PlayStation. The Dreamcast version received a huge graphical upgrade over the arcade version, and this is one of the first times where the home version was actually much better than the arcade. It's a fantasy fighting game where two combatants with swords or weapons will knock the living stuffing out of each other, but somehow they don't die after being impaled and stabbed with giant swords. There's a great balance of characters, either being strong and slow with a ton of power, or really fast and agile, but require more hits to take someone down. The animation, character designs, and environments are ridiculously good, and Soul Calibur is best enjoyed when playing against someone on the couch and going back and forth knocking the living stuffing out of each other while having some root beer and chips. You just don't get that with online multiplayer against randos. I highly suggest that you get a copy of Soul Calibur for Sega Dreamcast and invite a friend to come over and party like it's 1999. Sonic Adventure by Sega. Sonic Adventure is Sonic's first 3D move from 2D games to 3D games with a true 3D engine. Sonic Adventure is considered to be the first major Sonic game since the 16-bit era. I love Nights into Dreams and Burning Rangers, but it's nice to see Sonic Team get back to making real Sonic games. This is their first attempt at a cinematic story with voice acting and cutscenes. There are action stages with fast 3D Sonic running and jumping interspersed with hub worlds and interactive characters. Sega clearly took notes from what Nintendo did with Super Mario 64 and tried to expand on it when planning a 3D Sonic game for Dreamcast. Not every one of Sonic's 3D games have been as good as Sonic Adventure, but this set the pace and the high expectations that all other 3D Sonic games have to try and match. This game was later ported to the GameCube and a digital version for PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360, but the original definitive experience is on the Dreamcast. Shenmue by Sega. Shenmue is more than a game. It is an experience. It is a handcrafted, nostalgic journey that is so much more than the sum of its parts. For a time, this was the most expensive game ever produced, which had a crazy long development cycle that originally started on the Sega Saturn. This was one of the first games that featured an open-world, real-time interactive environment. I don't think you would have The Witcher 3 or Grand Theft Auto without Shenmue. It is set in a small town in 1986 Japan, and you play martial artist Ryo Suzuki, who is on a quest to find out more and avenge his father after a badass Chinese gangster martial artist showed up and killed him to take a magic mirror. But Ryo is not a total badass. He is just a teenager, and the revenge plot is just the MacGuffin to get the story going. The real game has Ryo exploring a rural Japanese small town, talking to all the locals, buying capsule toys, and playing games at the arcade, saving and feeding a stray kitten, talking to the old ladies, getting a job driving a forklift. It is a slow-paced detective game. Occasionally, there is some martial arts action and QuickTime events. By the way, this was the first game to ever have QuickTime events, but it is a mostly peaceful, relaxing game of exploration. Some people will go on and on about the relaxing, healthy, healing nature of cozy games like Stardew Valley. I am instantly healed and soothed by the sounds of Shenmue. It is nostalgic vaporwave aesthetic before vaporwave was a thing. This is one of the first games where the environments and towns felt like a place to me, not just levels. It was the artistic dream project of legendary video game designer Yu Suzuki. He planned a branching story that featured Ryo traveling to Hong Kong and then mainland China. The US only saw the release of Shenmue 1, and Shenmue 2 was only released in Europe and Japan on the Dreamcast, since Microsoft purchased the exclusive publishing rights for their new Xbox game system.
Something's happened, hasn't it?
The story would go unfulfilled for decades until Yu Suzuki launched a successful Kickstarter campaign and actually got to make Shenmue 3 for modern game systems. I love Shenmue. I love the artistic extravagance, nostalgic atmospheric details, and I could see why it was terrible for Sega's finances, but it remains a unique artistic experience which moved an entire medium of video games forward in a new direction. Jet Grind Radio by Sega. Jet Grind Radio, also known as Jet Set Radio in some regions, was one of the first cel-shaded games which used shader technologies to make 3D graphics look like 2D graphics. Set in a futuristic anime Tokyo-to, you play a group of rebellious skaters with self-propelling skates, and your job is to perform skating tricks and tag graffiti while fighting other gangs of skaters and the cops. It is over-the-top cartoon fun and features a ridiculously good techno-funk soundtrack. There was a sequel on the original Xbox, and ports of this game to the PlayStation 3, Vita, and Xbox 360 on the download services. But not a day passes that I don't wish that Sega would announce a remaster or a follow-up to Jet Grind Radio. Sega in the 90s was an explosion of creativity and attitude. Jet Grind Radio got my doki doki blood pumping with an ookie ookie waku waku feeling. And if you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you need to play Jet Grind Radio to figure it out. Space Channel 5 by Sega. Space Channel 5 is a funky, fun, rhythm dancing music game that features a 60s inspired swinging reporter with a miniskirt named Ulala, who reports on an alien invasion while fighting it with swinging dance moves. There actually was a 3-year lawsuit by musician Lady Miss Keir from the band Delight, who claimed that Sega based the character on her likeness and actually asked her to promote the game at one time. She alleged that they based the character on her, and I could definitely see why she thought that. The judge eventually sided with Sega. The game is a visual treat, with having a ton of dancing characters in front of a pre-rendered 3D background. It is trippy and fun. Sega in the 90s produced a ton of amazing games with a wide variety of genres. Space Channel 5 is one of my favorite music games. Hydro Thunder by Midway. Hydro Thunder was an arcade experience. It was jet boats racing on an interactive course like Mario Kart with power-ups, boosters, and pretty sweet water physics. It is not the most intellectually deep game, and you can quickly pick it up and have a good time. The Dreamcast version actually matched and surpassed the arcade version. Another thing of note is that this is the only Western-developed game on this list. The Dreamcast was a success in the West and features quite a lot of Western game development, with the exception of EA. This is a fistful of popcorn and Mountain Dew fueled good times. It is video game junk food, but it is really, really good video game junk food. Dead or Alive 2 by Tecmo. Dead or Alive 2 is Tecmo's fast and fluid 3D fighter. The first game was in arcades and received home ports to the PlayStation and Saturn, but the second game knocked socks off when it was released on the Sega Dreamcast. Much like Soul Calibur and Virtua Fighter, timing and speed are more important than memorizing special moves, but with the right timing, you can unleash some devastating combos in quick succession. This game featured some character dialogue before and after fights, dynamic stages that had the ability to have characters knocked off roofs and through windows, and also ridiculously fast loading screen. I still don't even know how they were able to pull off fast loading in between levels. The Dreamcast had a reputation of being a fighting games fan dream system, and it's in part of games like Dead or Alive. Daytona USA by Sega. Daytona USA had a home version on the Sega Saturn, but the later Dreamcast version was able to deliver the high frame rates and high resolution textures that made the original arcade version so visually stunning. It is a simple high-speed racing game, which is barely inspired by NASCAR, which still begs the question why they even bothered to get the NASCAR license in the first place. Delivering a good number of excellent, faithful arcade ports of then state-of-the-art arcade graphics is what the Dreamcast is all about. The cheery and peppy Japanese pop music, including the Daytona Let's Go Away theme song, is a core Dreamcast memory. Dreamcast. Success or failure? Why Sega failed when the Dreamcast was so awesome. The Dreamcast was released on $99.99 with a low price of $199. Originally, it had a white design, but they later had a black model with the Sega Sports logo. That's the one that I got, and that's the one that I'm still using today. By the way, if you've never played a Sega Dreamcast, it has a phenomenally loud fan. It's not broken. That's just what it sounds like. Another awesome thing of note is the VMU. The visual memory unit is a memory card, but it has a mini controller and a small LCD screen on it. When plugged into the Dreamcast controller, it will actually have cute graphic and animations related to the game, and they can actually be plugged directly into each other to trade data. And some games had mini games that you could download to the VMU. It was inspired by the Sony Pocket Station and the Tamagotchi virtual pet craze of the 1990s. Unfortunately, the batteries are not rechargeable and would drain whether you were using it or not. But even with dead batteries, it would function as a regular memory card. The Dreamcast had a bit of a tumultuous development, with a competing Durrell project and Black Belt project being done by Sega of Japan and Sega of America, before finally settling on Project Katana, which eventually became the Sega Dreamcast. I don't consider the Dreamcast to be a failed video game console. The Dreamcast was pulled from the market because of Sega's previous extravagant business practices and past hardware failures that put the company in a bad position. They were overextended and hemorrhaging money. Sega's Dreamcast became an outcast after losing that round of the video game wars. The company was bleeding red ink, and it was too big, too bloated, and had too much debt for too long to go it alone with their own platform, especially in the face of the industry dominance of the Sony PlayStation and PlayStation 2. And a terrible cherry on top of Sega's problems was due to the optional Windows CE operating system support that hackers were able to exploit and figure out how to make CD copies of Dreamcast games that could run on non-modified hardware. This happened right when CD burners became popular in PCs. Video game system hardware is typically sold at a loss, and all the profits is from publishing games. Fans could make their own copies of Dreamcast games on their personal computers and run them on a regular Dreamcast without having to install a mod chip. Sega didn't see a way out, so they became a third-party publisher and radically shrunk the size of the company. It was all just a dream. Ironically, Dreamcast games have been going up in price in recent years. One of the nice things about the Windows CE piracy issue is that there are Bootdiscs that can easily run legit Dreamcast software from other parts of the world by booting up a boot disk before putting in a Japanese or European game. The subtitled English release of Shenmue 2 was cancelled in the US, but it came out in Europe. I got the European edition in 2001, long before it was ported to the original Xbox. Buying Japanese versions of games is a great way to get legitimate copies of Dreamcast games, and it's even cheaper if you're going to get discs without game cases. There are also modern disc emulator options when you can play the entire Dreamcast library off an SD card or hard drive. I haven't gone down that route because I still have my Dreamcast games from 22 years ago. Sega got out of the business of running their own video game console due to their bad financial decisions of the prior decade, not because the Dreamcast wasn't good. The Dreamcast hardware itself is amazing. The games made for the Dreamcast are creative, stunning, and fun. If you are ready to start playing a retro video game system with amazing 3D graphics, then wake up and get a Sega Dreamcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share these videos with your friends and enemies that are into retro video games. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. play retro.